My name is Rachel Moran, and I am a professor at Texas A&M University School of Law. Recently, federal policy has disrupted the economy through tariffs and border crackdowns, and we're still not sure what the full impact will be on the country, on Texas, and on the Latino community. When we think about immigration policy, we also need to see how that affects our economy. The United States has an incredible economy. We have had the top gross domestic product of any nation in the world, and yes, that includes China, and we are far ahead of all those other countries. It turns out that immigrants play a big role in that productivity. To give you an idea, I want to look at something called Latino GDP, which is done using publicly available data by researchers at UCLA. They found that at the national level, Latino GDP accounted for 15% of our national productivity, $3.7 trillion out of our $25 trillion economy. So a lot is at stake in this debate. So I've told you a little bit about what's at stake for the country, but what about Texas? Well, Texas turns out to be a tremendous contributor to the national economy. It accounts for about 10% of our national productivity, second only to California. And when we look at Texas, again, Latinos play a big part in that productivity. And it's also incredibly important at the local level, where we see a city like Houston, where we see about $1.4 billion in a year accounted for by Latino GDP, or in Dallas, close to $100 billion, yes, that's with a B, of Latino GDP each year. So a tremendous amount is at stake for the country, for the state of Texas, and for localities. And there are some industries, especially here in Texas, that are very dependent on immigrant labor. One of them is construction, where it's not just immigrant labor, but there's a high proportion of undocumented workers in the construction industry. Agriculture is also very dependent on immigrant labor. And there again, there's a decent number who are undocumented. And finally, the hospitality industry, restaurants and hotels are very dependent on immigrant labor. And we should see the same pattern, which is increasing difficulty in finding workers, which means that you either shrink the business or you have to pay more for wages to get the laborers you need, the workers you need. We know that there's a concern that tariffs will increase prices. We know that there's a concern that a crackdown and the deportation of people who are working here will interfere with our ability to produce the goods and services we need. But we don't have clear direction about whether the federal government, if these materialize, these consequences come about, will actually make course corrections. So that means we have to be especially vigilant at the state and the local level. The state of Texas is very fortunate. All that productivity has led to a budget surplus. And so one question is, will some of that surplus be used to stabilize portions of the economy that are dependent on immigrant labor and might face uncertainty and turbulence in the coming months? At the local level, how will governments help their small businesses to survive these difficult and challenging times? How will private organizations like chambers of commerce intervene to help these same small businesses? And finally, what can we do as law schools and lawyers? Can we help with Know Your Rights sessions? Can we help with small business clinics that help these owners survive a time of great unpredictability? I recently wrote an article called The Pocketbook Next Time. And as we've seen, Latinos contribute hugely to the American economy. And so some Latino leaders are arguing that it's economic participation that is the route to full equality and recognition for the Latino community, rather than the traditional civil rights strategy. In my paper, I talk about some of the difficulties with that, because when we aggregate productivity, we ignore differences within the community. So it's clear that the Latino community, like the American community at large, has a huge class divide. And that makes for very unequal access to economic opportunity. We also know that some Latinos are undocumented, and this makes it very difficult for them to access legal work and participate fully in the economy. So while those aggregate numbers are important, they're not the whole story.